Hi, I'm Michele Passalacqua. I'm a graduate student in the Science of Urban Ecology class in Columbia's Sustainability Management program. I will be interviewing Max Cohen, a landscape architect who works at Future Green Studios in New York. Max is the director of design build at Future Green, where he designs and oversees the construction process at projects of all scales and characters. Max and I worked together on a LEED certified new construction residential project located on the Greenpoint waterfront in Brooklyn, New York. I hope you enjoy. Okay, great. So if we could just start out, if you could tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into landscape architecture.
Sure. Yeah, I started really actually, it goes really pretty far back to my childhood. I was always really interested in playing in the woods, building forts, and then that kind of transitioned into gardening jobs in high school, mowing lawns to helping people around the house with whatever.
Mhm.
And then I worked with this one artist when I was in 11th grade of high school, and he created all these sculptures in his property and these really beautiful stone pathways. And he really kind of made me slow down and appreciate how much impact landscape can have and how a really thoughtful approach really creates space. And that was really exciting. So going into undergrad, I went to UMass Amherst and studied landscape architecture for 4 years. And it was a really exciting program. Did a lot of model building, smaller scale designs, really understanding the kind of craft behind a lot of designs and a real hands-on approach, which was great. And then that kind of set me up till after undergrad. I started my own business.
Mhm.
I was working for a master gardener at the time and just slowly picking up jobs of my own. And so I did design build on my own in Massachusetts for about 3 years, and then went back to grad school at University of Michigan to get a bit of a higher level education, and was really interested in ecology. And the program there is heavily integrated in the School of Natural Resources. So you're working with a lot of scientists and really getting their perspective on things, which is very, very interesting. A little bit frustrating and discouraging at times, but also very enlightening.
Yeah,
So
why discouraging?
I think scientists just have a very particular approach
Mhm.
to design and really focus in on the experiments and singular variables. And so when you're looking at a site, you might be assessing this whole property for habitat suitability for one species of ground nesting bird. And
Mhm.
that's really all they have that kind of tunnel vision, and that's all they can really look at, which is extremely valuable. You get real data and
Right.
something that you can really bring forward and apply to design. But I think I found that it ended up feeling very limited
Right.
as well. And so just thinking about my role as a landscape architect and designer as a kind of connector and someone that could compile all those bits of information
Mhm.
and analyze them and then figure out how to apply them to a site that worked for multiple variables, different how
Right.
people use the site, how wildlife uses the site, different ecological services, etc.
Right. So you're thinking about the whole picture, whereas a scientist comes in and thinks about one aspect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Both totally valid approaches, but that was kind of my experience
Mhm.
there. And after grad school, I came to Future Green Studio to work in New York, which is just an extremely exciting environment to be in. Worked on numerous projects of different scales, and we're constantly doing different research that feeds back into our design work
Right.
and keeping things really engaged and kind of pushing boundaries both in like materials and then in our thinking about landscape, what it should be, what it can be, and how it kind of integrates into the city.
Right.
and
Yeah.
serves people in the greater populations.
Right. Do you work mostly in the city, or are you all over New York or?
We really work all over. When Future Green started, it was a lot smaller of a practice, doing more New York-based projects, a lot of residential projects around Brooklyn and the roof terraces. And it's really grown into this large practice that works throughout the country.
Right.
So currently I'm working on a project in North Carolina, one in Denver, um, a number in the city, all at very different scales. So it ends up being really diverse and exciting, and you see similarities between these projects,
Mhm.
and they all end up kind of feeding into each other in
Right.
one way
Yeah.
or another.
Yeah. Like you're learning lessons from one site and applying it to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Okay. So, what comes to mind when you hear the term urban ecology?
Um, I mean, I think about Richard Foreman's book, Urban Ecology, and all of the kind of different layers that feed into it. I think about the plants and then like insects and birds, and then my head just kind of like explodes thinking about
Yeah.
how it's all connected and we play a part of this. So it makes me feel small to like be a part of this greater system, but
Right.
also empowered to be able to like feed into it and help to strengthen it
Yeah. I
and
mean, you
help
have,
other people see it.
yeah. I mean, you're really like working within those systems and making them better. So, that's awesome.
Yeah, and a lot of these systems have just been kind of destroyed by human development, and it's really some of it's seen looking historically what was there and learning from that, and then I guess like part of it's just understanding that these systems are always kind of working around us, and you just need to um, you can re-engage them.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned like the history. Do you look back to like what existed at a site before you design on it? Are you trying to get back to like that historic baseline?
That is something that we often look at,
Mhm.
not necessarily to try to achieve what was there previously, but we're always inspired by history, and I think there's some level of kind of appropriateness to a landscape that references something so
Mhm.
rooted in what the place used to be.
Right,
But we are always trying to look at that and then translate that to what's appropriate for today, what
right.
population
Yeah,
today need, that we can start to pull some of the threads through that seem appropriate, but not necessarily trying to recreate a
right,
lost place.
right. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So building programs like LEAD specifically really require native and adaptive plants. And up until this point, I always thought like they were the most important thing to be incorporating into an urban design. Do you agree with that approach? Do you think that native plants have more value than non-native plants, or do you think that non-native species can have some sort of value within an urban environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting debate.
Mhm.
I don't think native plants are always the right choice for every site. I think you need to think about what's going to really do well
Mhm.
on that site and thrive and maximize the kind of ecosystem services,
Right.
whether it's creating wildlife habitat, absorbing rainwater, or creating shade for people. Thinking about like the functionality of the plants is really important. That being said, we do often try to like reference analogous conditions in native environments
Mhm.
projects. So when we're working on a rooftop, we'll look at kind of cliffside conditions
Mhm.
north of the city and see what plants thrive in those real harsh conditions and how we could apply those to a rooftop.
Mhm.
So it's not any native plants, it's really trying to find plants that have specific attributes, and if they can be native, that's wonderful. But oftentimes we're using native plants and mixing in other well-adapted plants that tend to almost look native, visually look native, so that it feels kind of appropriate to the site.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. What other things do you prioritize when you're designing? Like, is sustainability at the top of your mind, or aesthetics, or resiliency?
I mean, we really try to approach each site as a unique project,
Mhm.
looking at the client's needs, looking at the site history, the surrounding context, what's appropriate for the site, and kind of let that speak to us.
Okay.
So I think it's always just a balance of trying to create all these things. And we do often have a kind of agenda to push more sustainable materials, and just because personally we think that's an important thing. We're trying to improve the world, and when we can use a more sustainable material versus a tropical hardwood, say, we'll
Right.
try to integrate that and educate the clients about why we're doing that.
Mhm. Do you find the clients are receptive to that information?
Oftentimes, yeah, I think it plays into a greater narrative, and I think that kind of sustainability branding to a building is often really powerful.
Mhm.
Um, I think you have to be careful about whether you're actually doing it or you're making it look just making it look like you're doing it and describing it through
Right.
certain kind of buzzwords. But we try to do things where we can to improve things and get the client really on board with the mission, so they understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how what they're doing is better than the alternative.
Right.
It is often difficult though. A lot of times it comes down to money and reliability,
Yeah.
and a lot of the historically used materials, tropical hardwoods, foreign source stone, etc., have really been proven to perform in a certain way. So
Mhm.
the expectation is there. I think we try to incorporate a certain level of new
Mhm.
products and ideas to each project, but then also rely on things that we know are going to work well.
Right. Yeah.
We want every project to be a success. So with like native plants too, we'll try a few new things that maybe we've researched and seen other places and think will work, but
Mhm.
it's a bit of an experiment.
Right.
And if that doesn't work out, the other 95% of the plants will
Right.
thrive, and no one will know the difference.
Yeah.
But if it does work out, we add that to our toolkit and can improve ourselves in the future.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's great. So what about biodiversity within an urban setting? Do you think that it's important to keep that in mind? Do you try to keep biodiversity in mind when you're designing your projects?
I mean, it can be challenging within an urban setting. Oftentimes we'll use plants that create habitat for insects and birds. Um, but it can be pretty limited in an urban environment. In other environments, I think it becomes more important when you're working to connect patches of habitat and have a kind of greater impact. But we do see, like, in the urban environment, all of our projects serve as like patches within this greater network.
Uh-huh.
So each green roof space, even if it has 100 square feet of green roof and it happens to have a selection of native plants, it serves as like a stopping point for birds or insects that allow them to come into the greater city,
Hmm.
which I think overall is pretty beneficial. There's definitely kind of nuisance animals and that kind of conflict between, you just have to think about, like, where do you really want these animals? Do we really want to invite a bunch of birds onto this terrace with white pavers? Maybe
Right.
that's not going to work out so well. So um, Depends on the project, but it's really exciting when you see this kind of biodiversity coming into the city, see a new species of birds coming into the city, or we did installations at Rockefeller Center and we use butterfly weed, and you see within like a week there's monarch butterfly caterpillars there because they can smell
Right.
the pollen from a mile away. So it's
That's
really
so
exciting to
cool.
like see it working.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely.
that's just talk and renderings.
Right. Is there any type of green infrastructure that you'd like to see more of in the city? And we can talk about New York specifically. Or maybe there's a type of green infrastructure you want to design more than you do.
Um, I I think we talk a lot about the roads and the sidewalks as
Uh-huh.
this massive network throughout the city that's kind of has so much potential in
Mhm.
terms of what the square footage of it and the impacts to the public. So I think improving upon our roads and sidewalks are is a really great area to focus on for designers and hopefully implement policy that can improve and make it easier to incorporate things into those networks too. I think there's a lot of roadblocks and tape that you have to go through
Right.
to get anything built, and that often deters things from happening. So I think it's really exciting over the pandemic with all the street seats popping up over the
Right.
city and planter benches. It kind of proved that all of that space isn't needed for cars and we can do something better with it. So I'd love to see a lot of that space get reclaimed for public space, green infrastructure, and things that will benefit the city as a whole and wildlife.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the pandemic really shone a light on people wanting to be outdoors and like wanting to commune together and definitely. So speaking of people, and there's a lot of evidence that humans gain humans gaining access to nature is like extremely beneficial. Like, do you think about that? Like, do you think about city residents access to nature while you're designing, and like how do you feel about like enhancing people's connection to nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely important. I mean, since Frederick Law Olmsted designed Central Park, I think the idea has been in the forefront of landscape architects' minds, and just all the kind of mental health benefits, physical health benefits
Right.
that nature can provide, as well as cleaning the air um, and it feeds back into a lot of other systems too, increasing real estate values and
Mhm.
just improving the kind of city overall, and then ends up working as infrastructure to cut costs on keep our water clean
Right.
and just make the city a more desirable, comfortable place.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to talk about like your favorite project that you've worked on, or maybe the most interesting project that you've worked on?
Um, well, right now I'm working on a project in Raleigh, North Carolina
Mhm.
called Raleigh Ironworks, and it's a 20-acre site that we're designing with some developers down there. There's a number of buildings with retail, offices, and residential, and so it's all kind of mixed together on this site.
Mhm.
And we've created a site design that responds to the kind of look and feel of the property when we found it as this kind of abandoned industrial area. So we pull in a lot of kind of native, more spontaneous feeling
Mhm.
plants, trees, perennials, and grasses as this matrix over the site to really connect it all and give it a more uniform feel, as well as create a number of different kind of found objects throughout the site
Mhm.
and structures. So I'm pretty proud of it and excited to see it implemented. It's under construction now, so the first phase will be done over the next year.
Cool.
And I think it's a very different look and feel to a lot of work that's been done in Raleigh.
Yeah.
And I imagine that it'll get mixed responses from people, but once people understand the kind of benefits of it, I think it'll be wildly successful.
Yeah.
It's really exciting. It's good for people, good for nature. The maintenance of it will be much different than one of the other kind of manicured shopping mall
Right.
landscapes that they have in town. And it just kind of reframes how developers can approach projects like that. So
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that.
That's great. Do you think you'll get a chance to go down there and see it once it's done?
Yeah, we have plans to go down during construction a few times, and we've been down a couple of times previously.
Mhm.
And yeah, the first phase will be done this year, and then the second phase will follow.
Okay.
So we'll be involved with that for several years.
Nice. I'll have to look that up and learn more about it. Um,
Well,
yeah. Okay. Last question. So we're using, like I mentioned in my email, we're using the book from Future Green, Spontaneous Urban Plants. It's really cool, and I'm really like enjoying looking through it. Do you have a favorite spontaneous urban plant?
that's a hard one. I was thinking probably a vine like Virginia Creeper
Hmm.
would be one of my favorites, just because of its ability to really cover a whole surface and really reshape the whole space. When you see a vine wall or a fence that's covered in a vine, I think it's really transformative and exciting, and
Yeah.
people notice it. A lot of the other plants, personally, I get excited about too,
Hmm.
but oftentimes it's just pointing to a corner of the sidewalk and being like, "Wow, that's seeing that there." But I think something like Virginia Creeper is something that most people can get excited about and
Right.
understand how it changes space.
Yeah. That's a great answer. All right. Well, those are all my questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks so much to Max Cohen for that really great interview.